Shalom, my friends. Today, we are going to tackle one of the most profound and important questions a human being can ask. How do I know if the voice I'm hearing is the voice of God or just my own thoughts? How can I tell the difference between divine guidance and the chatter of my own ego, fear, or desire? By the end of this video, I will give you a clear, ancient, and practical framework rooted in the deepest wisdom of the Torah to distinguish between these two voices with confidence. You will walk away with a spiritual toolkit that will forever change the way you make decisions. But first, I want you to answer this in the comments below with courage and honesty. What is the biggest decision you are facing right now, where you desperately wish you could hear God's guidance with absolute clarity? Is it a career change, a relationship decision, a financial investment? By sharing it, you are taking the first step, admitting you need guidance beyond your own understanding. And as you do that, I want to invite you to join our sacred mission. We're building an army of 50,000 souls dedicated to living a life of purpose, prosperity, and divine connection. If you believe that the world needs more light, more wisdom, and more faith, then please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It is a small click for you, but it is a massive statement of your commitment to this journey. And for those who are ready to go deeper, to access the inner circle teachings and strategies that I cannot share publicly, I invite you to become a channel member. This is for the serious student, the one who is ready to truly transform. Click the Join button and step into the next level. All right, let's begin. I want to share a story from my early years as an entrepreneur. I was presented with a business opportunity that looked like pure gold. On the surface, it was perfect. The numbers made sense, the market was right, and the potential for profit was enormous. I prayed about it, and I felt this overwhelming sense of excitement and urgency. A voice in my head was screaming, "This is it! This is the one! This is the blessing you've been waiting for! Don't miss it!" I interpreted this loud, exciting, urgent feeling as a clear yes from God. I ignored the quiet, subtle feeling of unease in my gut, dismissing it as fear. I jumped in, investing a significant amount of capital and even more of my time. And for the first few months, it felt like I was right. But then, the cracks began to show. The partners were not as they seemed. The market shifted, and the entire venture came crashing down, leaving me in a worse financial position than when I started. I was devastated, but more than that, I was confused. I had prayed. I had felt so certain. I asked God, how could I have been so wrong? I thought I heard your voice. It was in the painful aftermath of that failure that I began a deep dive into our sacred texts to truly understand the nature of divine communication. What I learned is what I am about to share with you. The inability to distinguish between God's voice and our own thoughts is the root cause of some of the most catastrophic decisions in our lives. It is a spiritual sickness that the Yetzer Hara, our negative inclination, exploits with masterful skill. The Yetzer Hara is a brilliant mimic. It knows your desires, your fears, and your weaknesses, and it knows how to disguise its voice as the voice of reason, or even the voice of God. It will tell you to take the risky investment by dressing it up as faith. It will tell you to stay in the toxic relationship by calling it loyalty. It will tell you to avoid your true calling by labeling it humility. When you live in this state of confusion, you are a ship without a rudder, tossed about by the waves of emotion and circumstance. You live in a state of constant second-guessing, anxiety, and regret. The cost is immense. You lose money. You waste years of your life on the wrong path. You damage relationships. But the greatest cost is spiritual. You begin to lose trust in God. You start to believe that He is silent or that He is playing games with you. This is the ultimate victory for the Yetzer Hara, to sever the connection between you and your Creator. This is not just a psychological problem. It is the central battle of your spiritual life. Our Torah is a manual for winning this battle, and the master class is given in the story of the prophet Elijah. In the first book of Kings, we find Elijah at his lowest point. He has just had a massive victory over the prophets of Baal, but Queen Jezebel has threatened his life, and he flees into the desert. He is depressed, alone, and asks God to let him die. God tells him to go to Mount Horeb, the mountain of revelation, and there Elijah stands waiting to hear from God. First, a mighty wind tears through the mountains, shattering rocks. But the text tells us God was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but God was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a kol demama daka, a still, small voice, a voice of thin silence. And when Elijah heard that, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out to meet God. This story is one of the most important teachings in the entire Tanakh. God is teaching Elijah and all of us a profound lesson about divine communication. The voice of God is not typically found in the loud, dramatic, earth-shattering events. It is not in the roaring wind of your passion, the earthquake of your fear, or the consuming fire of your ambition. It is in the still, small voice. The voice that is so quiet you can only hear it when you silence everything else. This was the epiphany that changed everything for me after my business failure. I realized that the voice I had followed was the wind, the earthquake, and the fire. It was loud, exciting, urgent, and dramatic. It was the voice of my own ego and greed. The quiet, subtle feeling of unease that I had dismissed as fear, that was the kol demama daka. That was the still, small voice of God gently whispering, "Be careful. Look closer. This is not as it seems." I had been listening for a shout, so I missed the whisper. I learned the hard way that the volume of the voice is inversely proportional to its divinity. The louder and more urgent a voice is in your head, the more likely it is to be your ego or your fear. The quieter, calmer and more peaceful a voice is, the more likely it is to be from God. God does not need to shout. His power is in the quiet certainty that cuts through all the noise. So, how do we practically learn to hear this still, small voice? I want to give you a 3-part framework that I call the 3 divine filters. Before you act on any major guidance or intuition, you must pass it through these 3 filters. Filter 1. The Torah filter. This is the most fundamental and non-negotiable filter. The voice of God will never contradict the timeless written wisdom of His Torah, ever. If a voice in your head tells you to do something that is dishonest, unethical, or violates a clear commandment, it is not God. Period. If you get a business idea that involves cheating your customers, that is the Yetzer Hara, not a divine download. If you feel a pull to leave your spouse for someone else, that is your own desire, not God's will. God is consistent. He does not change His mind about His foundational principles. Before you do anything, ask yourself, is this course of action 100% aligned with the values and laws of the Torah?
Can I defend this action using the wisdom of our sages? If the answer is no, the conversation is over. It is not God. Filter 2. The character filter. This filter requires you to become a connoisseur of internal states. You must analyze the character or emotion of the voice. The voice of God, the Kol Damamad, has a very specific character. It is calm. It is peaceful, even if the action it is calling you to is difficult or scary. It brings a sense of clarity and rightness. It is patient. It does not rush you. It leads to long-term expansion and freedom. Now, contrast that with the voice of the ego or the Yetzer Hara. That voice is loud. It is urgent. It creates anxiety and a fear of missing out, FOMO. It is demanding and impatient. It often leads to a feeling of contraction, of being trapped. It promises a quick fix or immediate gratification. Learn to sit with the feeling behind the voice. Is it a feeling of deep, quiet peace, or a feeling of anxious, frantic excitement? The first is your soul. The second is your ego. Filter 3. The counsel filter. God rarely speaks in a vacuum. He is the God of community, of family, of Klal Yisrael. One of the most powerful ways God confirms His guidance is through the wisdom of others. The book of Proverbs teaches,
"Where there is no counsel, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors there is safety." If you believe you have heard from God, you should be willing to submit that guidance to a trusted, Torah-observant mentor, rabbi, or friend. This is not about seeking permission. It is about seeking confirmation. When you share the guidance, don't try to sell it. Just state it plainly and ask for their wisdom. If the guidance is truly from God, it will resonate with other wise, Spirit-filled people. If they raise red flags, if they see blind spots that you are missing, you must take that very seriously. The ego hates this filter. The ego wants to be the lone genius who hears from God in secret. The soul understands that wisdom is found in community. Let me give you a real-world example of how these filters work together. A few years ago, a member of my community came to me with a dilemma. He had been offered a lucrative job that would double his income. The catch? The company operated in a morally gray area. They didn't technically break any laws, but their business model exploited vulnerable people. He told me, "Rabbi, I prayed about it, and I feel like God is telling me to take it. My family needs the money. This is the breakthrough I've been waiting for." I asked him to apply the 3 divine filters. First, the Torah filter. Does this align with the principle of chesed, loving kindness, and tzaddik, justice? He admitted it did not. The business model was predatory. Second, the character filter. What is the emotion behind the voice? He confessed that it was not peace but anxiety mixed with greed. He was afraid of missing out on the money. Third, the counsel filter. What do other wise people say? His wife had expressed serious reservations. His father, a man of deep faith, had warned him against it. When we laid it all out, it was clear. The voice he was hearing was not God. It was his own fear and desire dressed up in spiritual language. He turned down the job. It was hard. But 3 months later he was offered a different position, one that paid even more and was completely aligned with his values. That is how God works. When you honor His voice by saying no to the counterfeits, He opens doors you couldn't have imagined. Now let's go to the advanced level. To truly master this, you must understand the battle happening within you. The Kabbalah teaches that we have two souls, the Nefesh HaBehamit, the animal soul, and the Nefesh Elokit, the godly soul. The animal soul is the source of our ego, our base desires, our fears. Its voice is the loud, chaotic noise in our heads. The godly soul, the Neshama, is a literal spark of God within us. Its voice is the Kol Demamadaka. Your life's work is to learn to quiet the animal soul so you can hear the godly soul. The primary practice for this is called Hitbodedut, which means self-secluded meditation. This was the practice of Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. It involves finding a quiet place every day and just talking to God in your own words. You pour out your heart. You talk about your struggles, your fears, your desires, and then you sit in silence. You don't ask for anything, you just listen. At first, the silence will be deafening, filled with the noise of your animal soul. But as you persist in this practice, day after day, a new space opens up, a quiet space. And in that quiet, you begin to discern the whisper of your godly soul. This practice is the spiritual equivalent of lifting weights. It strengthens your ability to hear. There is also a critical distinction between the voice of God and the voice of fear. Many people confuse the two because both can feel like a warning, but here is the difference. The voice of fear is vague and paralyzing. It says, "Don't do it, something bad will happen." But it doesn't give you clarity or direction. It just fills you with dread. The voice of God, even when it is warning you, is specific and empowering. It says, "Don't go down that path because it leads away from your purpose. Instead, go this way." God's voice always provides an alternative. It always gives you a next step. Fear just wants you to freeze. God wants you to move, but in the right direction. This is why the Torah repeatedly commands us, do not fear. It is not because life isn't scary, it is because fear is a liar, and God wants you to learn to distinguish His voice from the voice of fear. Let me also address a common misconception. Some people think that if something is difficult or requires sacrifice, it cannot be God's voice. They think God's will should always feel easy and comfortable. This is a dangerous lie. The voice of God often calls you to hard things. It called Abraham to leave his homeland. It called Moses to confront Pharaoh. It called Esther to risk her life for her people. The difference is this. When God calls you to something hard, there is a deep sense of rightness and purpose underneath the difficulty. You feel afraid, yes, but you also feel alive. You feel like you are stepping into your destiny. When your ego calls you to something hard, it feels like a burden, like you are trying to prove something or earn something. Learn to distinguish between the weight of purpose and the weight of ego. Another advanced distinction is this. The voice of your thoughts often calls you to your rights. I deserve this. I'm entitled to that. It's not fair. The voice of God, on the other hand, almost always calls you to your responsibility. It calls you to serve. It calls you to give. It calls you to grow. It calls you to take on a burden for the sake of a higher purpose. When you are trying to make a decision, ask yourself, is this path about what I can get or what I can give? Is this about my comfort or my mission? The path of God is rarely the easy path, but it is always the path of meaning. I want to share one more powerful teaching from the Talmud that ties all of this together. The sages teach that before a soul descends into this world, it is taught the entire Torah. And then, just before birth, an angel touches the baby on the upper lip, creating the indentation we all have, and the baby forgets everything. The question is, why? Why teach the soul everything only to make it forget? The answer is profound. The knowledge is not erased, it is buried deep within. Your entire life is a journey of remembering what your soul already knows. This is why when you hear the voice of God, it doesn't feel foreign. It feels like coming home. It feels like a memory. The voice of your ego, on the other hand, always feels like it's coming from outside, like it's trying to convince you of something. The voice of God resonates with the deepest part of you because it is speaking to the part of you that already knows the truth. This is why the practice of listening is so critical. You are not trying to hear something new. You are trying to remember something ancient. There is also a beautiful concept in the Torah about the Urim and Thummim, the sacred objects that the high priest used to discern God's will. Scholars debate what exactly they were, but the principle is clear. There was a divinely ordained method for receiving clear guidance. While we no longer have the Urim and Thummim in physical form, the Torah teaches us that we have something even more powerful, the Torah itself, and the Ruach HaKodesh, the Divine Spirit, that rests upon those who study and live by it. When you immerse yourself in Torah, when you live a life of mitzvot, of commandments, you become a vessel for divine communication. Your life becomes a living Urim and Thummim. This is not mysticism for the elite. This is the birthright of every Jew, of every person who seeks to walk with God. So here is my challenge to you. For the next 30 days, I want you to become a spiritual scientist. I want you to practice the art of discernment. 1. Practice daily hitbodedut. Spend at least 10 minutes every day in a quiet place, 5 minutes talking to God, and 5 minutes just listening in the silence. Keep a journal of what you experience. 2. Apply the 3 divine filters to every significant decision you face. Before you act, ask, does it align with Torah? What is the character of the voice? What does my trusted counsel say? 3. Choose responsibility over rights. In one small area of your life each day, consciously choose the path of responsibility over the path of ease. Choose to serve when you feel like being served. Choose to give when you feel like taking. 30 days. Do this, and you will begin to develop a spiritual ear that can distinguish the gold of divine wisdom from the dross of your own ego. You will move from a life of confusion to a life of clarity, from a life of anxiety to a life of purpose. You will learn to walk in partnership with your Creator, guided by His still, small voice. Let me leave you with one final thought. The greatest tragedy is not that people make mistakes. The greatest tragedy is that people live their entire lives without ever truly hearing the voice of their Creator. They go through the motions, they pray the prayers, they perform the rituals, but they never experience the intimacy of divine communication. They never know what it feels like to receive a clear word from God that transforms everything. This doesn't have to be you. God is not hiding from you. He is not playing games. He is speaking, constantly, lovingly, patiently. The question is, Are you willing to do the work to hear Him? Are you willing to quiet the noise? Are you willing to submit your guidance to the filters of Torah, character, and counsel? Are you willing to choose responsibility over rights? If you are, then I promise you, your life will never be the same. You will move from being a wanderer to being a warrior. You will move from being a victim of circumstance to being a co-creator with the divine. You will finally understand what it means to live a life of purpose, guided by the still, small voice of the Almighty. Shalom, and may you be blessed with the wisdom to listen, the courage to obey, and the peace that comes from knowing you are walking on the path that God has set for you.